All right, assalamu alaikum, everyone. Happy to be hosting a podcast episode. So if you follow my Substack, I recently wrote an article about a khatib that went over time, and it definitely struck a nerve with a lot of folks. So Brother Munir from SoCal, you can introduce yourself here, but he sent a lengthy comment, and we got to talking and decided that there was actually a lot to unpack that might be useful and productive in a podcast, just because a lot of just the details around khutbah quality, khutbah coordination, audience expectation. There's a lot of things in there that a lot of people don't really think about, right? They just show up on Friday, go home. They might talk about it later and whatnot, but we wanted to really dive a little bit in depth on khutbah quality in particular, the downstream impacts in the community, and so on. So, Brother Munir, jazakallah khair for joining. Really excited to have you on. If you want to introduce yourself, inshallah.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah wa alhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala rasulillah. So my name is Munir. I live out in SoCal, work at a biomed tech firm full time. In terms of Islamic studies work, I could say like continuous part-time studies, whether it's through Institute of Knowledge here we have in Diamond Bar, California, or just other institutes online or in person. So it's continuous, but nothing too advanced, and I'm not going to know Imam Sheikh titles, more of the layman here, just with a little bit more knowledge with weekly halakas and things to keep up that knowledge basis.
So what's your experience with Friday khutbah? Like obviously we all attend Friday prayer, but what's your experience in terms of like volunteering, helping, delivering khutbah, etc.
Yeah, of course. So I've been giving khutbahs maybe coming up on 3 years now, quite consistently. Not every Friday, granted, thankfully, but at least once a month I have one scheduled, and there's a lot of ad hoc second and third and substitute appearances that happen throughout. So it's something I'm intimately a part of. My friend group here, actually, our halakha group, is basically all on the khatib schedule in some regard, which is probably part of the problems we'll get into of why a group of professionals is the one doing all the khutbahs while there may be more others who could be doing it. So yeah, and then in terms of coordinating, not so much, but I'm aware of the coordinating process just because of how often I'm being tapped up by others and how they coordinate with me and with others in my group. So we can see in real time who is hitting up and who's the one who dropped out, and the chaos of all that.
Yeah, and then and for myself to add some context, I've been giving khutbah for unfortunately a very long time. I think I first gave khutbah in the year 2000 or 2001.
MashaAllah.
So definitely been a while. Um, and what's funny is what got me started actually was listening to a really bad khutbah. And I was just sitting there, and I'd done a lot of debate and public speaking and things like that in high school. So I was very familiar with like delivery and speech writing and preparation and all that. And I was just thinking like, okay, I don't know any of the Islamic things that this guy does, but he doesn't know how to talk about what he's talking about. Like it was just not an enjoyable experience whatsoever. So that's what kind of got me started in that. And then, alhamdulillah, through Qalam Institute and whatnot, we've done khatib training. And I've been a khutbah coordinator for a few years at two different masjids. And the irony, and I'll point this out because I think it's relevant to our topic, is the way that I initially became khutbah coordinator is I got nominated to the local masjid board. And a lot of the uncles were kind of like, oh, I don't know if we want Umar on the board, all the usual politics and stuff. And I don't remember I don't remember if I suggested it or someone else suggested it, but it was just like, hey, you like doing khutbahs, what about taking over the khutbah coordinating? And I was just like, okay. And I think in their mind, this was the equivalent of like giving a kid the controller that's not plugged in. Like, oh, this poor naive sap, like we're giving him this thing that he thinks is important, but we're going to go over here and do the real work. And I'm just sitting here thinking, you actually gave me the most important role in the entire community, which is coordinating who's going to be up there every single Friday.
Yeah.
But the short-sightedness of that just really blew my mind.
No, and I think that's like really symptomatic of how the community views the khutbah. And I mean, I ran these numbers with my friends just to like, give an idea. If as the main event of your masjid, doesn't matter how big your institute is, how small it is, the number one thing everyone's going to expect is a Friday khutbah. Forget quality for now. 52 Fridays average throughout the year. Let's say, hypothetically, you gave the khatib $150 honorarium, just out of the kindness of your heart. That comes out to $7,800 in the entire year. Now, how many masjids are actually doing that? Around me, not that many. even though we're in SoCal with all its money and riches and whatever else, which I think just that in itself is a microcosm of where is the value? Where do we see the value in things? I'd rather invite someone, fly him out for a Friday night community event, than pay the guy who's going to give the biggest audience, captive audience, we could even say, event. But we can talk more about why and how.
So let's well, I think that's a good place to break it down. Like there's 52 khutbahs a year. Let's maybe start with how do you feel the community treats that 52, and how should it be treated? Like what's the gap in terms of what people are doing versus how they should be thinking about? Because I think a lot of people, they vaguely have this notion like we want the khutbahs to be better. When someone sits through a bad khutbah, they definitely know it was bad. They might not
Yeah.
be able to articulate why necessarily in like a great level of detail, but they know that it was bad. Everyone knows when you've sat through a bad speech, right? Um, but they also won't know how to fix it or what the expectation should. And some people just genuinely expect that it's supposed to be boring and bad.
Yeah, and there's two sides, and I think we're going to address both. One, let's talk first from the audience, because I think that's the broader audience of this podcast. Most of us don't give khutbas, but like you said, we can identify good and bad. But I think it's very important for us to remember, as an attendee, I have to go in with the mindset of I'm coming in for dhikrullah, the mention of God, and I have to humble myself. And this guy can have the thickest accent and the worst prepared khutbah on planet Earth. By God, God decided himself that I'm going to sit in this khutbah particular, not over there where there's a better one, and not over here. This is the one he put me in with his qadr. So there must be something in this khutbah that I can extract and apply to my life to make the next week a little bit better. And I think if we could take just that, because that honest is on us, we can control that. Like I cannot be on my phone, as I see people around me all the time now. I mean, I've seen people literally pull out their phone, flip through, check the weather app, and then close it. Like they're just like some itch. They have to look at their
I was
phone.
sitting next to someone. This was just a couple of weeks ago, and he took out his phone, and like naturally, I'm just like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? And he updated his WhatsApp profile picture to a picture of a cat. I was just like, I don't know what the thought process was of like what the khatib was saying to him, remembering I need to change my WhatsApp profile picture to a cat.
I
But
don't know.
here we are.
Yeah, so I think from us, from an audience point of view, we can complain all we want, and I think there are legitimate complaints to be had because of the quality of what we're hearing up there. But we have to at least humble ourselves to say, I can get something out of this, no matter how quote unquote bad it is, and that's something totally within our control. But then for the khutbah, there, there's a lot of way. And the bare minimum, obviously, as a khatib, is we're going to go up there. I need to remind people of God. If my khutbah is going to be some agenda-driven thing where I'm pushing my politics or my vote for this or my even nonprofit work, like I get it, like this is a way for them to advertise. But if you cannot relate it back to God and His Messenger in some way, and as opposed to just preaching to me all the good you guys have done, I think that's completely devoid of what a khutbah should have been. That's a post khutbah announcement, or that's a Friday night program, and that's fine. Go have your platform and speak for an hour plus Friday night. That's great for the community. But khutbah has certain responsibilities that you can't push away. And if you diverge from that already, you're going to have, we can, no matter how charismatic you are and how amazing you are as a
Yeah.
speaker, there's no barakah in that. And I think that's something we also have to recognize is that hour, I mean less, I mean the khutbah itself, if we say the length being generous is 20 minutes and held to, that's a blessed 20 minutes. More blessed than if they gave a Friday night talk. The same speaker, same topic.
Yep.
I have to believe that because God blessed it and told me in the Quran to go to this. Fasho, run, rush to this thing, go to the remembrance of God. All right, must be something in this for me. And then even as a khatib, my words will reach further if there's more barakah in it. So I think we should always keep that in mind. But in terms of what makes it good and bad, and this is, I'm going to ask you this. There's a debate, actually, very recently, like 2 weeks ago, one of our regular khatibs here, very good. He's very good at what he does, and he literally got up there. This is during the fires in LA. And he said, "Look, I used to give my khutbahs based on the current events. He said current events are always changing, and if you're always chasing current events, my khutbah topic will just be chasing that forever, and I'll never like talk about the things I want to talk about or give the reminders that I want to give." He ended up like relating it to the fires a little bit. He just said coincidentally it works out. He said, and he was being blunt before the khutbah even starts. Like that should not be how we go about it. Now there's other people who will say, like, let's talk about October 7th, that weekend 2 years ago when it happened. Some khatibs didn't even address it, and then others, vast majority, I would say, actually did address Palestine and Gaza in some type of way. Where do you guys stand? And I know you guys do your khatib workshops. Is it, you say, go more here, be more relatable, so to speak, or is it just a general reminder better?
All right, so there's a few things here, right? So in terms of like what the audience gets out of the khutbah, we actually did surveys, and I did another round of surveys just a couple of months ago locally here. And the questions that I always ask, like as an attendee, what are you expecting the khutbah to be about? What are examples of good khutbah topics that you've heard? What are examples of bad topics that you've heard? How many khutbahs in the past month inspired a positive change, and how many khutbahs in the past month were perhaps relatable to you, right? As you can guess, on average, it was like 1 point something and 1 point something on how many the last 4 weeks had a
Mm.
positive impact or were relevant to them. So vast majority are not. And in the comments, what they end up saying is some mix of, we're coming to the masjid to come closer to Allah. We already know all the bad things that we're doing. We're not coming to get beat up over the head. We already know all the mistakes that we're making. We're coming here because we need some kind of spiritual rejuvenation and motivation to like carry us through the next week. And on the whole, that's what most people are expecting. And when they give examples of bad topic ideas, I would say the commonality has usually been that it's either overly political or overly technical, like focused on like education and information
Mm.
versus actually focused on some type of inspiration and things like that. Now, in terms of like what we teach in the workshop and stuff, the crux of it is the ayah in Surah Al-Jumu'ah, هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. And I want to translate the whole thing, but basically the messenger has come to you, reciting his revelations, purifying them, and then teaching them the book and wisdom. And so that's the formula that we teach for what a khutbah should be. A khutbah, first and foremost, is reminding the audience of Allah and His revelation, and it is purifying them, inspiring them, motivating them, which takes precedence for the actual khutbah itself, takes precedence over education. There's
Hmm.
other forms for education and classes and formal learning. The khutbah is not it. So that's kind of the approach. Now, in terms of those major events and topical events, I think it varies, right? I remember I had Friday khutbah the Friday of when the Arab Spring happened, when all this stuff happened in
Mm.
Egypt, and I had khutbah like that Friday, and I did not feel comfortable at all. Like I'm like you know, it is out of my realm to talk about politics in this country, much less like another country that I have no
Mm.
actual ties to. I'm not Egyptian. I don't have Egyptian family. I don't know anything about Egyptian I don't know anything. I mean, I could probably give you some very basic, like that was a good
Yeah.
guy, that's a bad guy, but beyond,
Yeah.
beyond that,
Yeah.
you probably don't want me commenting on this to the community. But it was a difficult situation because I didn't know what to do, and so I gave my general, just a general khutbah. But in the end, I did say, mention like, look, this obviously is a very huge event. This is happening. Let's make dua, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My take is that when there's a major, major event, even if you're not going to address it, you still need to acknowledge it. Otherwise, you really look irrelevant. Now, if we
Mm.
take the example of October 7th, I was not the khatib that Friday, but I attended Jummah that Friday, and I was absolutely like incensed afterward because the khatib essentially pretended that like nothing happened, gave a
Yeah.
very very generic like seek forgiveness, Allah forgives, etc., like super cliche, super like prepackaged
Yeah.
khutbah, and I was just waiting like, okay, at least throw in a token, nothing, right? That to me is one extreme, where like a major event that is of concern to the ummah at large, like you haven't answered, right, or haven't addressed.
Yeah.
Same thing I would say, like 2016 election, right? Everyone was freaked out, like, oh my God, like what just happened? I had khutbah that Friday as well, and it was the same thing, like just, okay, let's acknowledge the thing that everyone is thinking about because it's occupying all of you. But still, I think speak about it in a way, again, what's the North Star is, can I speak about this in a way that brings people closer to Allah? Not speak about it in a way where I'm doing political analysis, not in a way where I'm trying to be a journalist on the member or anything like, because that's not the place for those things.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people get caught up, is when the member is not, BBC or CNN. If there's a major event, I think it's appropriate to sort of acknowledge what happened, but again, in a way where even if you don't know what to say, you at least make dua, acknowledge the situation, or mention it in a way that somehow helps people strengthen their relationship with Allah. Because again, ultimately, like you said, if the khutbah is not helping someone increase their closeness to Allah, you haven't really fulfilled the purpose.
No, and I totally agree. I think there's a way to do. So I've for the past however many months now, like until this recent ceasefire, I haven't had to give a khutbah, but they every Friday that I had to give one, so like at least monthly or so, I was relating it to Gaza, but I think there's a way you can always do these things where what you're really trying to do, I think, as a khatib, is also reorient people's worldview.
Yes.
Because why do we get annoyed by the generic? You said it, and we all say it. The generic ask for forgiveness. Isn't asking for forgiveness one of the greatest things on planet Earth? Of course. I mean, this is as great as it gets. I can get to Jannah through this forgiveness. Then why is it the greatest thing you could possibly tell me to do is the most boring khutbah I've ever heard in my life? Or I'm like, I already know that. Because I think there's actually probably multiple angles. One is there are a lot of people who give khutbahs like they write, and a book is not how you read something, is not how you speak something, which I guess is a skill in itself people have to understand. But when they do that, they're reading an audiobook to you in monotone, and you're thinking to yourself, like, this is why I'm falling asleep. It's not the content, it's just how you're presenting it and how it's being presented to you. This is not the forum for your book reading. So that's one problem. I think the other one is they don't give you a perspective that maybe you haven't heard before. I'm not saying make something up. It doesn't have to be this hip new thing like I found out a new tafsir type of thing, but
Yeah, it's a
can you
different
show
problem.
me an ayah? Can you give me an ayah that I've heard 100 times and show me how that reflects forgiveness? And I'm like, wow, I didn't know that mufassirun were this deep, and I had no idea that this ayah I recite all the time is about forgiveness. Whoa, that changes my mind completely. Like, there's enough in tafsir literature that you could pull this off, but
So,
maybe the
so
khatib
can
doesn't
I
want to
add,
spend the time researching.
so can I add one thing here?
Yeah.
And this is literally the differentiator between a bad khutbah and a good khutbah, right? It's so I give people this example. You have a class being offered in college. Okay, maybe it's like the history of the Middle East, maybe it's statistics, whatever. You have two professors teaching the same class, same textbook, same syllabus, same curriculum, same everything. One professor's class is empty, the other one's got a waiting list. Why? The information is actually the same, but one is connecting with the audience and one is being relatable to the audience, and one is just kind of spouting the pre-programmed stuff. And I think when it comes to a khutbah context, the way that I look at it is, if you don't have, like, a khutbah needs to convey a message, and forgiveness is an idea or even a topic, but it's not a message. Like, if I just walk up
Hmm.
to you and say forgiveness, you'd be like, okay. If you post on X, forgiveness, doesn't mean
Yeah.
anything. But if you say something like Allah forgives your sins no matter how great they are, now you've got a message and you've got something that you can fill out the rest. Again, there's going to be amazing tafsir points on all things forgiveness. If it's focused around one message, it'll resonate with people. And you can dive deeper into examples and context and things like that. I think the problem is that when it's generic and someone's just kind of quoting haphazard, like, oh, this thing on forgiveness and that thing on forgiveness, is just like, you know, a collection of random
Yeah.
things on this topic. Everyone's okay, I've heard all of these. None of it's tied together in a way that is any different than I've heard it before. And I think
Yeah.
that's where the problem lies.
We've literally heard the khutbah where he goes up for 25 minutes about 10 points on forgiveness. And then right before he sits down, he says, and the next khutbah will talk about 17 more points of forgiveness. And he says, yeah, like, no, no,
I
not
can
like this. Yeah.
I can do you one better. Um, I sat through a khutbah where he went up there with a book, and I was wondering what was going on. And he said, "Today I'm going to talk about the character of the Prophet ﷺ." I was like, okay. He had Adab al-Mufrad up there with him, and he read the table of contents for the
No
Holy
way.
Quran. The Prophet was nice. The Prophet was grateful. The Prophet was smiling. The Prophet was this. The Prophet, like, that was the whole khutbah, was literally him reading out the table of contents to show what the good character was.
What a, that's create points for creativity. Never would have thought.
And the
Well,
funny thing is, I was the coordinator at that time. Someone had requested to get this guy there, and then after the khutbah, he came up to me and he said, I would really love to be on the rotation. This is how much I charge every week. Can you put me on once a month? And I was just like, give me your number, I'll get back to
yeah,
you.
that's
But
your recommendation. Yeah, I can't wait to hear you. Yeah. Well, I guess so. We could probably get into because we both had this question. Why is it the quality isn't where we want it to be? What do you think? I have
okay,
my crackpot theory, as you heard before, but like we can get into, or I guess where it leads to, I should say.
okay, I've got a number of theories on this, right? So I would say when we started doing Khatib workshop, one of the most common things was, can you please tell my imam to attend? can you please tell so and so imam to attend? And I was just like, oh, okay, like, and so there's a few things I'm gonna get into, and you can kind of maybe I'll let you figure out where you want to go. So the first thing I'm gonna say is American Idol syndrome. Okay.
Mm.
And what I mean by American Idol syndrome is this: there's always, like, in the early episodes, there's this guy that gets up and they do the whole montage, like, this person grew up in like a one stoplight town and they sang at all the birthdays and bar mitzvahs and this and that, and they're like showing all their friends like, yeah, this person's gonna win the competition, and they're hyping him up and gassing him up and all this, and then he gets up there,
Hmm.
completely bombs, and the judge is like, yeah, you're trash, please, like, never bother humanity with your voice again, like, just kind of putting them in their place.
Yeah.
And how does the person react? Like, you have people who are experts in their field, who are, track record of successfully turning people
Hmm.
professional musicians, that are telling you that you don't have the talent or the skill to do this thing, and they're in denial.
Yep.
They're like, they start crying, they break down, they can't take that feedback. They're like, I'm going to prove them wrong, and they never prove them wrong because they are actually legitimately bad. Now, what happens in a khutbah setting is you've been giving khutbah for like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Every Friday, someone comes up to you afterward and says, oh, Jazakallah khair, Sheikh, amazing khutbah. Oh, wonderful khutbah as always. One, this, that. And
Yeah.
look, and I know I can give a terrible khutbah and I will have five people complimenting me after. And I know, like, I know it was bad and I know that I'm going to get compliments, right? But you hear that for 10, 15 years, and then now someone comes and says, hey, like, actually, you're not a very good public speaker. In their mind, very rationally, they're going to say, okay, I have 20 years of positive reinforcement and feedback, and I have one person giving me this criticism. That person's a hater.
Hmm.
And they can very rationally justify that in their head. Like, well, if I was really that bad, all these people wouldn't be complimenting me all the time. And so they genuinely think that they're good. The other thing that happens is, people don't know that they're bad. I think a lot of people have just never gotten training, right? Like, they don't consider
Yeah.
public speaking to actually be a skill that you need to practice and learn and develop. No, I mean, yes, I'm sure there's always a few anomalies where people are just naturally gifted and charismatic and they can do that. I'm not one of those people. Like, I definitely had to, like, practice the skill, and even then, like, there's always a lot of room, but they don't treat it as something that they need to get better at. They're just like, yeah, I speak how I speak, and that's good enough. So they're not actively improving it. The other thing that happens from a mushad board perspective, and I've seen this now a number of times, the board often is not so as concerned with the quality as they are with safety. And what I mean by being concerned with safety is, there's like, I can think of a handful of guys, right? Like, they give off the vibe of like, okay, I speak Arabic, I have an accent, I'm very charismatic, I can kind of be loud and animated while I'm speaking, and I don't say anything off the wall. I never speak about any of, like, crazy things. I just kind of give
Hmm.
people a general reminder. And the khutbah might be straight trash, garbage, doesn't make any sense, doesn't make any point, but it just sounds like he knows what he's talking about. And for a lot of uncles, that's good enough. That this person is reliable, they show up once a month, that spot on my calendar is filled because, again, they're so bad that no one else is inviting them, but this guy's giving me one Friday a month. I got it locked in. Sounds like his Arabic is good and he knows what he's talking about. Sounds religious. And so, yeah, let's just
Hmm.
pencil him in and eliminate the headache from our plate.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's one side of these khatibs are just like should not be up there, but they're up there because of longevity or whatever it is. Then on the other hand, it's interesting in SoCal. When I first heard this, I had a visceral reaction in that they told me, yeah, all the shuyukh down here, or a lot of the shuyukh, I should say, I don't want to throw them under the bus. A lot of shuyukh will not give a khutbah without an honorarium. And at first I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the dean, like this is God Almighty. How could you possibly not just go up there for free? And then after speaking to one of the shuyukh who I was very close with, he gave me the feedback, and he's like, by the way, these are people who've been giving khutbah for like 5 years straight, by the
Yeah.
way, weekend after weekend. They don't get breaks type of people. And then they decided, I'm not giving it without an honorarium. You say, oh, I get it now. They've realized the community could care less about what they're contributing. The time it took to research, the time it took to synthesize all of that, the time it took to practice it, the time it took to commute to your community that's not actually his local community.
Yeah.
All those things, you guys don't care because I give the khutbah and then you guys will come up and be like, oh, brother, why didn't you speak about this? Oh, brother, you were late to the khutbah. Even I know you drove 30 minutes, but you should have been here earlier. And oh, but they said, oh, the community doesn't actually value this thing. And then by the way, they did all that and there was no honorarium. So imagine, said, oh, you guys don't value this. How about if you guys do value it, you guys give me a little honorarium, and then I'll come back to you guys. And what's funny is, a lot of places did not change their ways. A lot of these shuyukh still don't give khutbah because there's no honorarium to be had at a lot of these places, which is mind blowing to say the one event of your week that is the
Most
obligation,
important.
captive on it. Like, how are you not investing in this thing? How is this not the main investment as opposed to all the carpet change and the new member and this, that? I know at Masjid, they just renovated, beautiful renovation for the member, lights, this, that. I know for a fact they don't give honorarium to the khatibs. The khatib looks good up there, but there's
Yeah.
no honorarium for that man.
So I've seen the other side of it too, where there's masjids that will give an honorarium every time, and it's because they've actively chosen, for example, not to have an imam at their masjid. And so like
Mm.
instead of having an imam, we're just gonna like we've already budgeted this amount for khutbahs and this amount for that, this amount for that. So I've gotten to a point where like I've had and I'm gonna see two people that know you a little bit better, like, okay, Omar, we have an honorarium, but it's up to you if you want to take it or donate it. And it's like sort of very awkward when they say that. And at first I didn't know how. At first, like I felt like okay, fine, just don't, whatever.
Mm.
But then I sort of realized also like whatever I'm doing is also like setting a precedent for the other khatibs, and I don't know what
Yes.
everyone else's situation is. So I've gotten to the point where like when they ask me, if they ask me, do you want an honorarium? That's the question I'll get because
Mm.
they won't show their hand whether they give it or not. So I'll say, look, if you customarily give your khatibs an honorarium, then I would request the same, just to sort of keep
Yeah.
force them to sort of be consistent and professional on there. And then whether I choose to donate or whatever is on my side. But what I tell them is, if you customarily give one, then please give me the same. If you don't, then I'm not requesting one. And that's kind of, and again, but again, for transparency's sake, I have a full time job. I'm working
Yeah.
professional. I am not dependent, alhamdulillah, on community work to make my living, as a lot of shuyukh are. That's a
Yep.
completely different situation. So I do want to make that abundantly clear.
No, and I think we don't. The working professionals who are going on this rotation should not ruin it for the rest of them. It's like, yeah, mashallah,
Exactly. Like,
I'm so blessed. Yeah.
mashallah, our IT brothers never take an honorarium. We're just gonna keep, yeah,
Yeah, and then what happens is they perpetuate like, oh, why invite the imam when I can invite the IT guy who has an awful khutbah, by the way, but like, hey, he's free,
yeah.
so we'll take the free guys over anyone else. Yeah, so that's an issue.
And
Um,
I also, and in terms of like why the khutbah quality is not good, I'll add one more thing, which is I think a lot of people who are organizing, the khutbah rotation or like in charge of it, they've never actually given one, and they also
mm,
don't have again, because it's such a specialized skill. They don't have the ability to tell who's a good khatib and who's a bad khatib. For a lot of
mm,
people, it simply comes down to like, oh, that person's charismatic, they must be good.
yeah,
I've heard some speakers locally who are very charismatic, very energetic, super magnetic, zero content, zero substance, and dare I say, like sometimes saying very dangerous things. And I've heard people who they're not quite monotone, but they're very measured, very whatever in their delivery, and actually the khutbahs are excellent. But
yeah,
for most people, they'll just be like, "Oh, that one's boring. That one's exciting." Or, what I'll hear from the older crowd, like someone that makes a couple of jokes, they're like, "Oh, we really enjoy it. We really enjoy it. He makes us smile." So it becomes sort of that simplistic, which is I understand like it made you feel happy because you smiled or whatever. Um, but if we're talking about the amana or the trust of the masjid in providing, the Jummah service, worship, whatever, to the community, it needs a much finer comb. And I don't think that, unfortunately, a lot of people are equipped to understand like what makes a good speaker or a bad speaker, what makes a good khatib versus a bad khatib, etc.
I had never considered that angle. That makes total sense now. So actually, you brought up an ayah. I want to bring up one too. So our halakha group was going through Sutta Mujadila, and there's an ayah in there. It's interesting. So I'll just give the translation for the sake of time. It says, believers, if you are going to meet privately with the Prophet ﷺ, then present قدموا بين يدي نجواكم صدقة. Give a little charity ahead of time. So it's a very unique situation. So what happened? The very next ayah in the surah, interestingly, abrogates it, which is weird in itself. Like have an ayah, and then the next ayah is basically saying you don't got to give sadaqah when you meet with the Prophet in private. Also interesting is that this ayah was said to have only been acted on by one person, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and it barely lasted like a day, maybe even hours. The timing is said to be very short where this ruling existed and then went away. So one of the lessons my teacher passed on us was to say that maybe like the hikmah to pull from this, like why even mention it if it's just going to go away in 2 seconds, is to say you need to value then. you need to give it its value. You want to meet with the Prophet in private, so you can't just go to the Imam. Oh, Imam, I have 20 fatwas I need from you. Can I wipe over my socks and can I travel? And like you need to show its value. Give a little sadaqah and then speak to the Prophet in private. Now it got abrogated because of the circumstances and Allah's ultimate wisdom. But it's just interesting to think that we don't put a value on the things that Allah values and then expect something out of it as well. I mean, even just think about this extends beyond khutbahs. Think about non-profit Muslim work or even for-profit Muslim orgs and like fashion brands or products that they're selling. For some reason, when it comes to a Muslim owned something, I want a discount. I don't want to pay you full
Yeah.
price. I want the buddy system, whatever it is. Like I have friends who run a non-profit here for youth work. And I told this story before in a khutbah even. Like people were shocked. They gave the first time they did a summer camp, they left the financial aid unrestricted. So if you ask for it, we just you're Muslims, we trust you. Come the day they by the way, they did this at a loss. At the end of the day, when they did all their numbers, it became at a big loss to them. The day of the camp, what are these kids rolling up in to get dropped off or dropping themselves off, I should say too? Maserati, Bugatti, like high end Mercedes, Tesla. It's like you needed financial aid. You couldn't afford the 350 for an all expense, everything else paid over the weekend trip. But like literally, that's less than one of your car payments. Like, how could you not afford, XYZ? But again, I think it's just a lack of value in this deen. Oh, I'd rather pay for my Kumon after school program than your guys' Islamic whatever. I think
So
that extends to the khutbahs.
so can I give you a flip side to that? So
Yeah.
there's an element of an audience not valuing the khutbah. I don't know what your experience is. I've run into a number of khatibs who don't actually value the act of delivering the khutbah.
Mm. Yeah, I
Um,
saw one 3 weeks ago. I could tell.
you know, I'll give you I'll give you two examples that kind of jump out. So like I was talking to one imam and I was asking him like, what's your khutbah preparation process, etc. And he was kind of like he was actually bragging in a sense. He was like, well, I sit on the minbar and while they're calling the adhan, I think of something and I just get up and talk about it.
Wow.
And he goes, and sometimes I like repeat the same topic and people don't even notice. And I was like, they do notice, but they can tell that you didn't prepare, so they've tuned you out.
Mm.
And I think that's part of where like the value proposition comes in is like if the I think a lot of people you can tell when someone's prepared and when they haven't. Like when they have a clear logical flow to the points that they're making and the importance of those points, etc. And like their delivery might not be the greatest, but people will overlook bad delivery if your content is good, right? It's just like everyone's heard the speaker were like, okay, English was clearly their fourth language. They didn't know how to string two sentences together. It was very broken. It was messed up, whatever. But people walk out saying like that was from the heart.
Yeah.
Like I really felt like grammatically, stylistically, it was a disaster. But the content was so sincere and powerful that everyone walked out being like, I felt that. On the flip side, I've heard people speak very professionally, elegantly, sophisticated. Let me think of a politician.
Yeah.
And you just leave saying like that was off. Like the vibe wasn't there, right? Like something was clearly off. And it's usually for me, it's a preparation thing. Another person I sat through their khutbah. The whole khutbah was like this. And Allah, says, in the Quran, you know, oh you who believe, you know, be patient, and see. Like it was just going like that the whole
Man.
time. And the thing is, I know this person. I've met him. I've conversed with him. That's not how he normally speaks. Like if you went out to get lunch with him, that's not how he would talk. But the reason that that's happening on the minbar is because you don't know what you're talking about next because you haven't prepared. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have a clear line of thought. And the thing is, everyone can tell you're unprepared. And so they zone out because if you're not valuing like the fact that you have to get up on the mic and address the audience,
Yeah.
it's almost like why should I give you the respect of like I mean I'm being forced on Allah's wisdom I'm being forced to sort of give you my attention and not be on my phone, but you haven't really earned it in that respect.
Yeah, and I think it's unfortunate. I think a lot of people now they've been conditioned after years about khutbahs. The guy going to give the khutbah next, it could be a new guy, and he could be giving a good khutbah, but they are so used to their brain is programmed. When I step in here, it's nap time. This guy's not going to be good. It's going to be boring. So they don't even listen, even when it's a good khutbah. Like their brain's like, whatever. I can assume based on percentages, 99%. Same thing here, even though it could be the next best thing. But I think, unfortunately, we've created too much of a precedent for us, and now we're working against a current to
So
build up that reputation again.
I gave khutbah at an MSA in a different. It was in a different state, and it was a khutbah that I'd given at like, let's say, at least half a dozen times at other places. So like,
Mhm.
you know, when you've given the same khutbah like 6, 7, 8 times, you know what type of feedback you're going to get, right? Like
Mm.
if people come and give compliments, like what they're going to compliment, like you have a feel for what the reaction is going to be. I gave this khutbah at an MSA, and there was like a line of people waiting to talk to me, and it was just like, that was amazing. This is one of the best clips, but like it was very extreme, like unlike the previous. Like it
Mhm.
was just very like, oh, this was so great, this was so amazing, and I'm like, after like the first 3 or 4, I was like, this is very weird. Like
Yeah.
then I started asking people, like, just like I appreciate it. Would you mind sharing what resonated or connected with you? Overwhelmingly, I got 2 responses. One, we're so happy that like we understood what your point was when you were done. That
Wow.
was the most common. And the second was, I just feel so good that you didn't yell at us.
Thought we were past that era, man.
Oh no, no, we're not. I sat through one recently.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I guess advice to khatibs: if when you're giving and you want to say there's a problem, don't say you, say we. As an
Yeah.
FYI, that might help things. Anyway, that's a sidebar. But yeah, okay. That's yeah, again, yeah, you can give literally like an average khutbah even, and you probably get that same praise just because you did the bare minimum of prep, because that's
And
the standard that we've left.
it's not hard, but I want to kind of shift gears. So let we talk about there's 52 a year. The way that I look at it is, if a person's attending khutbah every Friday, right? And you're incrementally getting better every single Friday, after a year, you should be able to look back and be like, you know what, alhamdulillah, I've actually tangibly
Mm-hmm.
improved to some extent. I added this one good deed to my daily routine. I've changed the way that I thought about this. Whatever. There's a million and one things,
Mm-hmm.
but there should be marked like improvement that you notice from that. And I think that's kind of missing. And so the question that I kind of want to pose to you was, well, one, is that even a realistic expectation? But two, um, what downstream effects are you noticing from that? Like, okay, so if let's say khutbahs are bad for whatever reason, we're putting the wrong people up, the people that we're putting up aren't preparing, whatever the reasoning is, and which we've talked about it a little bit, but what's
Yeah.
now the consequences of that happening?
Yes. Yes. So this is my crackpot theory. It's 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 a simplified theory, but my theory is that bad Jum'ah khutbahs are the root of all Islamic West problems. So what I mean by that, not all obviously, but again, this is a highly superficial theory. But here's how it goes. We have bad khutbah after bad khutbah. So I think to myself, like, man, I'm not getting any manhai. I'm not changing anything about my life year on year. I look back and like, what changed? There was nothing practical to come out of that. It was theoretical. It's just that maybe they're trying to teach me fiqh. I didn't get it. So what do? I'm talking to my friends about it. We're all complaining and commiserating. And one friend says, we actually had a good khatib last week. Oh, really? Please share his contact. So he shares the contact. That guy comes. Oh my God, he was amazing. Then what happens? That guy's name gets around a bit. And he starts going on the khatib circuit. Now, this poor guy, he's a good speaker, mashallah. He comes in with a pure heart, and he was doing it for the sake of God. But now, because there's such a dearth of options, what happens? This guy is getting thrown around everywhere, and he's saying yes to people. Maybe he's an imam, and it's part of his income now, even. So he becomes a quote unquote celebrity imam, which comes with its own problems. One, we're not investing in our own communities. Instead, we're investing on an outside resource to come in and fill a gap, which is a symptom of a larger issue. Another one is that poor guy goes through his own problems. There's enough precedent now that we've seen enough scandals and divorces and whatever family issues with those people because they're traveling too much, to be honest. Like they were
Yeah.
trying their best. They would love to stay local, but because of circumstances and now fault of their own, they're being pulled left, right, and center. And then the third one is implicitly, not explicitly, they're teaching a new generation that, hey, you know what? Being the celebrity guy who's up there on the minbar, being told, like, mashallah, amazing speech. You're speaking about God and his messenger. I love that. And people love you because of that. I want to be like, I want to be an influencer, an Islamic influencer. And now you're creating a generation that thinks that if I can just give khutbah at the minbar of XYZ sheikh, then I'll be known, and then I'll be getting the big honorariums and invited to the conferences. Speaking of which, now we have conferences to fill these iman gaps, or more so, and they're bigger and grander than ever. But they're so big, and the demand for these iman highs is so strong. We need more speakers. You know, there's that guy over there. He doesn't really have like Islamic qualifications per se, but you know what? He's very charismatic, and what he talks about, he knows it really well. So let's invite him, and let's invite her, and let's invite. So you invite some people who are qualified, and then you have the Islamically, I should say, unqualified, like myself. You're platforming me. Same. Here we are fulfilling this issue, and then what happens? These guys go to enough conferences, start believing their own hype, and then what? You know what? I'm going to start my own platform. But, I'm competing with other people for the same audience. So what I got to do? Well, I'm going to attack that org. I'm going to talk about the dirty laundry of the other one when they invited. Let me tell you guys what they did. And now we have what we have today, the Dawah scene as we see it today, the Dawah mafia versus the Dawah whoever, and everyone's, on their member, so to speak.
It's not a fully crackpot theory. I definitely see threads of that in places. And you know what? And I have seen, and this is like the weird thing, right? It's like sort of the supply and demand. When you're not, and look, and I've noticed this a lot, right? Especially like from the side of being a khutbah coordinator. It's very stressful to fill out that calendar, right? And be like, okay, we've got these people all showing up, and then also like it's not just filling out the calendar. You got to have backups. You gotta, when that person cancels last second, what happens? Who's stepping in? There's a lot that goes into it, and so the real answer, like, people need to invest in developing like their own community members to be able to step in and give a khutbah. And I think it's a bit circular, but one of the issues with that celebrity thing that you're mentioning is that it inflates the bar unnecessarily. And so now, like, when okay, this person had a little bit of talent and they suddenly got super popular super fast, what it does is it changes the expectation that, well, like, oh, my local imam, who might actually be like a very good khatib and very knowledgeable, well, he sucks, right? Like, I don't want to listen to him because he's not as good as this guy on YouTube. And so I'm going to follow this guy on YouTube. And so it makes it seem like everyone else is terrible, only these few people are good. And so people have unrealistic expectations, right? And so that kind of creates its own thing. But also, when you're not now investing in like your own community, like let's get 3 or 4 people in our place who are able to give the khutbah, then you become dependent on, you have supply and demand problem. I have 4 slots. So if we have 2 Jummahs every Friday, I've got 8 slots this month that I need to fill. The really good guys are filled up. Okay, I reached out to a student here, I reached out to IT brother volunteer there, but I've still got a couple of spots. Well, there's this email in my box from this guy that wants to come in, who's been begging me for a spot. I don't really want to put him on, but I don't have a choice because I gotta fill this spot and I don't have people to go to. And so there is, and I want to make it sound like there's an epidemic of this. This is definitely like a very small number of people, but it's, if you've been on the side of organizing, it's noticeable. Where there are these guys who don't have any business really being on the member, but they've thrust themselves into that position. They can sort of speak somewhat charismatically. Maybe they recite nice. Maybe they've affiliated themselves with an organization to do some fundraising, whatever. But they're always available, and then they start getting put on. And then it's like that domino effect. Well, once, oh, that masjid, you gave khutbah at those 2 masjids, oh, you must be good. Come on over here. And I've seen that happen too, where it was just like, and it was a place where like I knew the people, like, hey, why did you invite this person for that Friday? Don't you know, like, this, I was kind of like, there's some issues, blah, blah, blah. Like, oh, he spoke at this place and that place, so we just assumed everything was fine. And I'm like, no, actually, there, please, like, let's get someone else. But, so it's kind of circular. Like, these people then start filling the gaps. And I don't know what the true solution to that is.
If I had the solution, we would be making a killing selling this course online. Yeah, it's tough because on one hand, if with the khatibs we have today, because obviously the slides are being filled, if they themselves, like I personally, I record myself every single khutbah.
Same.
For myself. I don't share it, and just put on my phone, and then on my way home I re-listen to it. I say, man, filler word here, could have dropped that. I should stop saying that word. Stop speeding up here. Slow down on that part. Okay, next time I give this khutbah, the next khutbah I give, I can improve that one thing. And the next khutbah is 1% better, and the next khutbah is 1% better, inshallah. But I don't know that we have that investment from the khatibs on the circuit, which I think goes back to what your earlier point, that do the khatibs realize the honor of the position of giving a khutbah? Member of Rasulullah, the member of God, messenger of God. You're going and fulfilling the responsibility of addressing the Muslims as the Prophet ﷺ
Well,
once did.
it's also like anything else, right? Like if you're halfway decent, you can fill up your schedule. And look, and I've done that before. I remember having a stretch where I went like 9 weeks straight, like
Oof.
giving khutbah every week, and afterward I was just like, this is actually unhealthy for me,
Yeah.
because at that point, like, what I noticed was like my preparation process wasn't the same, my level of seriousness was like, everything sort of went into an autopilot mode, as opposed to like if I, and so like I actually then, and I still do this, I limit myself, like,
Yeah.
one, max two a month, and that's it. um but but the people that you're talking about, a lot of them, they're going to be forced to go into autopilot because they're doing it so often that even if they wanted to, or they know that they should, they're not going to have time anymore, because now again the demand is rising so much.
Yeah, and actually, that for the 1% of people who listen to this who do give khutbah that often, one of my teachers made a good point. He said that's not healthy for that individual because you're also meant to hear the khutbah, and if
Yeah,
you're always the one preaching, then when are you taking the feedback and saying like, "Oh, wow, that's a good point. I should incorporate that into my life," as opposed to preach, 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 preach. Like eventually, you got to take a learning, reminder as well. You can't just keep
yeah.
saying reminder for myself first and foremost, and then talk.
No.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that, especially when you're up there. It's there's a disconnect. Like it's harder to take the lesson from yourself. You need someone else to kind of go beat you down a little bit in the right way.
But no, but feedback is super important. Like it's I also feel like you have to have a circle of people that can give you like
Yeah.
honest feedback, that like family is great for it, right? Like I remember giving khutbah one time, and like I'll look, and it happens, right? Like you're feeling it, you're just like, yeah, everything that I prepared, I'm like knocking it out, and start getting like a lot of compliments afterward, and I was like, cool, like it was like, yeah, you feel it.
Yeah.
It's not the I'm not saying that it's appropriate or Islamic or whatever, so don't misconstrue, but it happens. And my dad came up to me, and I was like, all right, cool, now I'm gonna get like the proud dad moment. And he's like he like leans in like, did you prepare this week? And I'm like, what? I'm like, yeah, it was amazing. Didn't you hear what everyone else was saying? And then he's just like, usually your khutbah is a lot better than this.
Dang.
And so it just, just
Yeah.
boom, burst the bubble right away. But you need, it's very, like, the mic can be very delusional. Like, there's a lot of people
Yeah.
who think that, again, they think they're amazing, but like you need people that can sort of give you the honest feedback, and like back to reality, like, okay, what do I need to do to improve, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. For
But
sure.
that mindset is missing, I think, kind of to your point. Like a lot of people just aren't thinking in that way.
Yeah, and I I don't know what it is. Whether it's they need a. I mean, I guess and this is symptomatic of other things too. Is if that person being platformed onto the top platform doesn't have a mentor somewhere in their life, like you can probably bet there's going to be an issue down the road with these people. You need someone in their life who doesn't care what that khatib thinks and will tell them like, "Hey, man, you're too proud, too many jokes. Maybe tone it down. Nobody cares about what you did. Don't tell too many anecdotes about your amazing life. If you don't have those people to tell you something of that nature, it's going to be so hard to improve or protect yourself even from all that praise. I mean, if you practice and practice and get to the point where, like, mashallah, you're giving good khutbahs from God's grace, and people are telling you you're giving good khutbahs, wow, it's reinforced. And I am doing this for the sake of God, but everyone knows that, yeah, it's real, that want
Yeah.
to show off or that want to be recognized. It's a very real thing. But one of the first three people thrown in the hellfire is that person who showed off with their Islam, with their Quran, Qari, and recitation, whatever else. So if we don't have people in our lives to hold us back like that, a mentor group, a mentor, or even like a halakha group, your boys who can tell you, real speak, they'll just tell you, man, you're not that good, man. You're not that guy. You're not that guy. If you don't have that, it's going to be very tough for you to ever improve or protect yourself even.
And this, by the way, this is another downstream effect of what you were mentioning earlier, with kind of how the celebrity culture pops up. And one of the traps of that, especially if when people get too big too fast, right? Like before they're sort of
Mm-hmm.
ready for it, is even if people are willing to mentor you, you're not going to be willing to listen. And I have heard that, from people that are whatever. Well, what is so and so going to tell me? I'm much more famous than he is. Like
Mm,
I've heard someone say that, like, and it's kind of like, wow, like, okay, well, that's maybe not the right way to think about this,
yeah.
but that element is definitely there, of like, you're not going to be willing to take advice when you feel like you've gotten so big.
Yeah,
And
and we've seen the consequences now. People being platformed way too early, and our community is recovering or trying to fight it as of today,
and
even. Yeah.
so I don't know if you have this dynamic in SoCal. And again, I won't say that this is, again, it's not a large dynamic, but because I've been on the other side of like coordinating, I sort of deal with some of these quirks that most people don't see too often. But there, I've dealt with an element of like, oh, I don't really want to give khutbah that much shit. Like it's too small, or like their congregation is too
Oh,
small, or this is not like sort of. They won't say it's not at my level, but in so many words, it's sort of like, yeah, I'm not going to waste my time at the small musalla. There's that element that, again, I'm not saying that it's common. I'm not saying it's rampant, but as a coordinator, I have dealt with that a few times.
no, that's unfortunate. I mean, alhamdulillah, like the group I'm with, like we go wherever. We don't really care. Like if anything, we ask if like a bigger masjid asks us to give khutbah. First thing we do is message the sheikh of the halaqah and be like, "Yo, they're inviting me. Should I take the invitation?" So if he tells me no,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to take it. Right? Like you want someone to be there who's willing to tell you, no, you're not ready for it yet. Even if you have the knowledge and the charisma, and if he's just like, you know what, I know in your heart that if you got up there, you're going to give a good khutbah, and that's not good for you and your iman. So no for today. Like if you that's good feedback. And actually, I'd love to ask you because I've not been on the coordinator side too much, but one of my friends he makes a good point. He says, why is it I'm getting a call on Wednesday to give khutbah on Friday? Every Friday for the until from today to Yom Al Qiyamah is written out for you. Plan it ahead of time. How are you guys asking me on a Wednesday about this? So can you help those of us on the other side? What's going on that you're getting less besides like obvious sicknesses? Okay, well we can assume that, but what's happening where khutbahs are not being planned out in advance for at least a month, we'll say?
Okay, I'll tell you the most common one that I've seen is the khatib's fault for double scheduling themselves. It it just, I know no one wants to hear that, and your favorite khatibs have done it, but they'll double book,
The guy who
and
complained, by the way, who made this joke, he always double books himself, but he knows this.
so advice number one is learn how to use a calendar, everyone, and keep it updated. But no, it's definitely double booking, and then and for I kind of hate saying it like this, but it's the element that I just told you. It was, hey, I've gotten the message. Hey, I know you scheduled me for Friday, but such and such prestigious masjid is inviting me. Can you
Oh,
find someone else?
interesting.
Because they really want to go to that other place.
Mm-hmm.
Or it'll be like, oh, hey, I know I had khutbah this Friday, but I got invited out to XYZ community, so I'm traveling. And I'm just kind of like, okay, like, it is what it is. So there's that element. So there's a lot of times there are last second cancellations because uh, people just aren't taking care of their schedule, or like something pops up. Sometimes it's sickness, sometimes it's whatever, but it, myriad of reasons. But yeah, that's why. Now on the there's another component, which is some people are actually poor at planning. So one masjid that I was helping coordinate, because I've helped a couple of different masjids coordinate. Um, One of them was very weird. So I was responsible for coordinating 3 out of the 4, and the masjid was supposed to, because there was like some weird subcontract situation with Islamic organizations, whole long thing. But essence was, masjid was responsible for 1, I was responsible for 3. Now, what was happening was the board was just like, "Hey, Omar, we're like, we trust you. Do you mind? Technically, this is our contract, but." I was like, "I got it. Don't worry about it." So I was in practice handling all 4.
Mm-hmm.
Election happens. New person comes in. He's got someone that he wants to give the spotlight to. He says, "Hey, looks like our contract says that we have 1 and you have 3." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "I would like to take the 1 back." I was like, "Okay, sure." I'm like, "Look, here's the Google Doc. Here's the calendar. I'm going to highlight your row in yellow. You have whatever first, second, whatever Friday of every
Mm-hmm.
month is yours. I'm going to fill in mine so you always see, but make sure that you update this so everyone knows what's going on." Not even 1 month after this, I'm staring at the Google Doc. And the guy was being a real jerk to me about it anyway, so that's a different story. But I'm staring at I'm like, I see that no one is scheduled. But he was being so mean to me about like, we don't want you to do it. I'm going to handle it, whatever. I was like, okay. I didn't say anything to anyone. And then, sure enough, like 45 minutes before the khutbah, I get a call from someone saying, "Hey, who's giving the khutbah today?" I said, "Why are you asking me? This is not my Friday." And the guy just didn't book anyone. And after that, they gave it back to me. They're like, "Yeah, can you please handle all of that?" So some people are just, genuinely, I don't know, like I don't want to say you have to be a detail oriented personality, but like it's not a surprise that there's a Friday Joe when you schedule someone.
Yeah.
Um, but there is some people are just not good at scheduling out ahead of time. Sometimes it's hard to get commitments because like if you're trying to schedule me and you say, "Hey, can you give khutbah on like March 19th?" I'll be like, "Well, look, tentatively pencil me in, but I'm not sure. Something might come up. Like I can't really like fully commit
Hmm.
to that right now." And so I think in that case, like you just need a proper thing of like, okay, I'm putting you down, but if you need to cancel, let me know by March 1. But then I, as a coordinator, I need to just set a reminder for myself, like,
Yeah.
hey, text this person on March 1 and confirm that they're still coming. So there's always, it just takes a little bit of work, and being proactive. But yeah, I'll say, at least in my experience, the reason for the last second stuff is because the khatib canceled for some reason.
All right, that makes total sense. I have another question as a coordinator. You kind of referenced it already, circumstances, but typically, if someone says, "I would like to give the khutbah," do you let them give the khutbah?
Okay, so I got a good story about this. So I I'd moved to another city, and no one, I didn't know anyone there. I just started a new job, and funny thing was, the first Friday that I was there was the Friday that like a new musalla opened up, and it happened to be next to my office. So I'm like, okay, cool. So I go there, and I'm praying there, and the same guy is giving khutbah every week. It's been like 2 or 3 weeks. Then I randomly see the same guy in my office building, and I'm like, "Assalamu alaikum." I'm like, "Oh, wow, you." So I started talking to him, and he's like, "Yeah, like he's like the head of the masjid, whatever." And I was like, "Oh, you give khutbah every Friday?" He's like, "Yeah, because I can't find anyone." And I was like, "Look, I know that we don't really know each other, but I used to give khutbah regularly where I moved from. I'd be happy to help out." And he was like, "Sure, can you do it next Friday?" And I'm like, "Yeah." So he put me on next Friday. So then I became a regular, giving it once a month, whatever. I got to know him, great brother, mashallah, whatever. After some time, I was talking to him, and I was just like, "Hey, you remember like when I asked you to just put me on and you just let me give khutbah?" I was like, "That was kind of irresponsible. Like, you don't know what I could have done or said." I was like, "I could have created a real problem for you, but you just put me on." And he was like, "No." He goes, "This is how I look at it." He goes, "I have 52 slots a year. If you come and mess up, I lose one out of 52, and I don't invite you back. But if you do a good job, now I can use you over and over again, and that helps me out quite a bit." So that was sort of the way that he was looking at it. Now, in terms of from the coordinator side, I would say, like, look, our circles are so big or so small. You already have an idea of who's who. You already
Hmm.
kind of have some feel for like how they give khutbah, etc. Now, I will say that there are a number of situations where it's like an organization is requesting, like, "Hey, can we please come give khutbah at your masjid?" Or, "We would like to do a fundraising." And now in those cases, I don't know who the khatib is. And so what I would do in those cases is I would say, like, "Can you please send me the name of the khatib ahead of time?" And I would then usually try to look that person up on YouTube, or like see if I could find other things that they've given. And again, not that I'm like giving this great formal judgment or pronouncement on them, but it's just like, I'm just, again, like when you've done it long enough, you just need a few minutes to sort of figure out, like, can this person do it or not do it? Like, you get a feel
Yeah.
for it, right? And so then it's that same mindset, like, okay, no major red flags, give the guy a shot. If it works out, great. If it doesn't, we lost one out of 52. And that's kind of the thing. um the other part of, like, if it's a khatib that you don't know, or let's say it's a newer khatib, right, maybe an inexperienced khatib that you do know, I think in those cases, that's where you got to be particular about what spots are you giving them, right? So, for example, if a masjid has like the 1 p.m. the 1 p.m., the 2 p.m., and then like the 3:30 after school. Well, if you've got someone that's wanting to give khutbah and get experience, don't give them the 1 o'clock where there's going to be 1,000 people. Give them the 3:30. Let him come. There's going to be a smaller audience. Let him sort of get his reps,
Hmm.
get some experience. And if they're open to coaching, great. Like, you can sort of do that and work with them. But ultimately, sometimes, like, you got to give it a try. If
Yeah.
there's no overriding reason to say no, give it a shot. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. Like that. That's sort of how I think about it.
No, Michelle, I like that. It's very, very balanced. One more question for you
Yeah.
as a coordinator. I think it relates as well. Do you typically give a title? Like, I know this is like certain messages do this, but like before the khutbah comes out, they'll say, "This is the khatib, and here's the title of his khutbah." Are you pro or con this? So I give you the perspective from my end is one. Some people say don't do it, and I think I kind of agree with them. One of the reasons is current events. Things could change very quickly. So this person promised you on Wednesday that it's going to be about X thing. Thursday something happens, they completely change it. The title doesn't change, and everyone goes in with weird expectations. Then the other one is that if the title is not right, I'm just gonna forget catchy. Just that. Let's say it says the word forgiveness. I'm like, another one on forgiveness. I'm gonna go somewhere else. Or this is the only place I can go. This is gonna be so boring. I already go in with wrong expectations before single words come out of his mouth. So I kind of agree with that. Or I'd rather just go in and hear what he's got to say. Its own
So
value.
I agree with you pretty much for the same reason. And like, look, and like I said earlier, right? Like a lot of people don't have a clear message, right? Like if it's forgiveness, that's not a clear message. If it's Allah forgives them no matter how great they are, okay, you got like a clear message. That could be a title of a khutbah, but then the khatib has to have the discipline to follow through and
Mm.
stick to that topic, right? It's a double edged sword. Like if you flag that this is the title and then you actually address it, cool, like that was good. But if that's the title and then you sort of don't meet the expectation, even if it was a good speech, you're sort of hurting yourself. And so that's why I don't like the idea of trying to publish the title ahead of time. And also I don't know. I don't think that it really adds any value, to be honest.
I think it's more of a YouTube thing, but yeah.
It's what
Mm.
do we put on the live stream?
Yeah,
Forget
exactly,
that.
exactly.
Now I will say like so one masjid that I've dealt with has asked in advance for the khutbah title and also an outline, and also if there are any ayat or hadith that you know that you're going to quote, to send them ahead of time.
Well,
Why? Very interesting reason. So that the sign language interpreter can prepare ahead of time.
mashallah. Wow, that's
So
cool.
so I got that request. I was like, huh? I'm like, this is a lot. And as I'm reading the email, I'm like, man, I'm like, no one's ever asked me for all this. And then I saw like this is so that our sign language interpreter can adequately prepare. I'm like, oh. I'm like, okay, yeah, like that makes total sense.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's
Um,
amazing, mashallah.
so I've seen that as well. I've also seen some places ask for it ahead of time out of micromanagement, like because they want to be particular about what you say or don't say.
Yeah,
And then in which case I just turned on the invite. Like if you
makes sense.
trust me enough to invite me, then let me give the thing. If you
Hmm.
don't trust me, then don't invite me. I'm more than happy like not giving it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. From our perspective, we're just like, I work my full time job. I'm doing this as extra.
Right.
If you want to make it a burden on me, I'll go give it somewhere
Exactly.
else. Yeah, makes sense. Um, did I have another question? I think that may have been from my end.
No.
How do you conclude your khatib workshops? Motivation for us.
So the entire crux of the workshop is just prepare, right? Look, it's what we talked, is fulfill the amana of the position. It is an act of worship. It's the most important congregational event of the week. Just give it its due. And giving it its due doesn't mean that you have to be overly charismatic and this and that and like kind of like the fake public speaking things that you think of. It's just, did do you have a meaningful message to deliver to the audience that is of benefit and use to them and helping them come closer to Allah? Did you do your best to prepare and adequately think through your talking points? And if you did that, like that's all anyone can really ask of you, right? Like, is that you gave it its due and you prepared appropriately. And then once you've done that, look, as like Prophet said, that convey for me, even if it's one eye, because the one listening may
Hmm.
understand better than the one conveying. And so if I've done my part, maybe Allah will put barakah in it such that even though I didn't really understand everything properly, but I gave it my best shot, maybe the audience got more benefit than I could have imagined them getting just because I put the effort in, inshallah. So that's really the gist, and then feedback and improvement. I mean, it's never ending. It is a skill. It has to be worked at. It has to be intentional.
My friend, they started a website. They didn't like they were building it. I shouldn't say they started it like it exists. Rate my khatib, but then there's a I don't know. There's a double edged sword. On one hand, it'd be nice to give khatibs feedback and for people to see ahead of time. Like it's kind of like rate my professor, right? oh,
Yeah.
this so and so's coming. Oh, he has 5 star, 4.5 stars. I want to hear him. But then on the other hand, it might destroy somebody, and then they're
and
just
and also like you don't not everyone's qualified to give that feedback.
yeah.
Like like I knew one imam, like the board was giving him a really really hard time, and they like put in his contract that like they were going to grade his khutbahs, and like if he wasn't over like a certain average, like there was
Wow.
contractual whatever, like it was asinine.
Yeah.
Um, but the thing was like, okay, you want to put this in here that you're gonna like grade his khutbahs. Well, before you do that, can you tell me, Islamically speaking, what are all the
Mm,
requirements of a khutbah to be technically valid from a Sharia perspective? Can you even list the conditions out? If you can, how are you going to assess his performance?
yeah.
So there's a large element of like qualified feedback that becomes important.
No, no, I agreed. Agreed. And I think part of the reason why they stopped it,
Yeah,
there's ways to work around it, or like where if you get the khatib's email, it only goes to them, so they can only see it, right? So I think there's ways we can implement tools like this, so at least the
and there's
speaker
ways
can
to
get
get
feedback.
qualified feedback. There's ways to get qualified feedback
Yeah,
where like I've had an imam come to me and be like, hey, I want you to give me feedback, after my
yeah.
khutbah, and I'm like, okay, cool, and like I give very strong feedback. So I had one person who was, like a seminary student, and he was like, "Oh, Can you listen to my khutbah recording and give me feedback?" I was like, "Sure." And so in my mind, I'm like, "Okay, this is someone that's gonna end up doing this,
Yeah,
regularly. This is a person who's studying Islamic studies. Like, I gotta tell
yeah,
him what he needs to hear, not in a mean way, but like I gave him a very thorough breakdown. Like, at the 142 mark, you said this. At the like, I kind of really like gave him a 2-page thing, and I didn't get. I like it was like 3 months later. He told me, he goes, I almost started crying when I read your email, and I'm like, why? He goes, that was the first time I ever gave khutbah, and you tore it apart. And I was like, I'm like, I thought that you'd been like giving it, and this was just helping you. Like, I didn't. If I had known that it was his
yeah.
first one, I would have given the feedback very differently, right? But I had another imam like asked me like, hey, give me feedback, and I was just like, okay. So I gave him some general feedback because again, I'm like, I know not everyone can handle it, and then he just looked at me. He's like, no. He goes, give me real feedback. He goes, you're
Hmm.
just giving me fluff, and I was like, okay, fine. And so then I like
Yeah,
sat down and went through it, and to his credit, I actually saw him like trying to make some changes
that's cool.
uh, going forward. And I've done the same thing, right? Like I've been to a masjid where like again 2 shifts, and so I'm talking to the imam and I'm like, hey, are you going to be in your office while I'm giving khutbah? And he's like, yeah, I'm sitting here waiting because he had the second one, and I'm like, do you mind giving me feedback on mine when I'm done? And he's like, sure. And I was like, and I was the same time like, oh, listen, I don't want just like some general whatever. I'm like, I have to give this khutbah again. Tell me in detail what I need to
Hmm.
change to make it better. He's like, I got you. And so then after I finished my khutbah, I sat in his office and like he actually had made notes. And so we actually sat and like he went through and like gave me a number of things like, hey, you quoted this ayah and talked about this, but in my mind, you should have gone over here, or the audience might have been expecting you to talk about this thing. And so he was giving me all kinds of things that like even if I'd listened to the recording a million times, I wouldn't have come up with that feedback on my own, right?
Yeah,
So getting that type of feedback is super valuable, of just like him being like, hey, you talked about this, you should have gone here, maybe you could have brought this, this hadith, like just that kind of feedback. Like you need someone that can actually give it to you.
yeah. No, 100%, 100%. You have to be willing to take it, and also be willing to want to implement it, and humble yourself to say,
And there's
I'm
an and
not,
there's an
I'm not the
art
best
to it
one.
too, right?
Yeah,
Like it's I know we joke about like safe spaces, but you really need to create like the proper environment and camaraderie to like to be able to give that feedback to each other.
yeah. Like my friends who, when they ask for feedback on theirs, depending on how many khutbahs they've given, sometimes I just give them one thing and say, like, look, I could give you 100 criticisms,
Yeah,
or next time, nobody really cares what surah ayah number your ayah is from. Just say the ayah, man. Like, no one's paying attention. No one's going to look up the reference later, I promise you. Unless you're making up Quran, you're going to be all
yeah,
fine. And that's boom. Then they just, next khutbah, just that one thing changed. Wow, great. You've made it 1% better. Simple as
exactly.
that. Yeah. Oh,
All right. I think we're kind of at time too, but um, before we go, can you please I meant to ask this in the beginning, but you run a Substack called Heavenly Order, which is
yes.
very interesting and unique. As we're talking about like cliche things that everyone's heard,
Yeah.
heard a million times. But this is definitely something that I don't see other people doing in the English language. So if you could please like share a little bit about the project, what you have, how it came about.
Yeah.
Like, how did you get started with this, and what do you have planned with it?
Radical Fake, thanks for giving me the time. So yeah, it relates to this actually. So this thing, Heavenly Order, .substack.com. If you go there, there's a entire website full of blog posts speaking about the organization and structure of the Quran. So just like we're talking about a khutbah needs to have a beginning, end, and a coherent message throughout, and if you deviate from that, the khutbah quote unquote is bad. Same, likewise, the Quran has a structure and a cohesion to it that has been studied for many years now. But though the idea of looking at a surah on its own and saying like, what's the structure of the surah? In other words, why does it go from topic A to B to C? And also overall, why is it in this order? Like why A, B, C, D, all the way back to, and sometimes you say, this topic's repeating in the same surah. What's going on here? And so there's been proposals, and this is really like burgeoned in the last 100 years as like a serious topic of research. A lot of Orientalists are into it, Muslims as well, delved into it, and I myself do this on a weekly basis. But look at Sword and say like, why did Allah start with topic A and end with topic A? And then he went to topic B, and then his penultimate topic was topic B as well. And then in the middle, it seems like it's a central theme that connects A and B all together. So they call that like a ring structure, you may have heard. There's other structures like parallel structure. There's also the one everyone's familiar with is linear structure. Chapter 1 goes to chapter 2, goes to chapter 3. And that's why Surah Yusuf is so unique, is because it's so linear. Everyone's like, oh, this makes total sense. But then our Western minds, we can't comprehend any other structure essentially. So when the Quran delves from that, like even something small like Surah Nas or Surah Lahab, say like, yeah, it's just a surah about, condemnation or about the jinn or about a lot of Jazamma. If I told you what's the central idea, oh, it's about afterlife,
Yeah,
Judgment Day, all of it, all of Jazamma is
yeah,
that.
all of it.
But when you start thinking like, really though, then why did Allah separate the surah? Like, why have a surah as opposed to just be Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim all the way to Min al-Jinnati wan Nas? Just one big text. Why separate it? Why break it up into ayat? Why even numbers, right? Why even have more than one ayah? Just one long, there's a period, just put a period at the end. Like, make it a big textbook. But then if you reflect on it and look at why did Allah speak about this topic here, in the time that he talked about the topic here, you start getting a better appreciation for how Allah organized his speech, for the arguments being laid out, for the we call it subtext, right? And when it's whether it's in literature, in movie form, there's subtext involved where someone says something, but while they're doing it, they're actually implying something else. They do this. There's a fidget. Oh, he's nervous, but he didn't say he's nervous. The author never said he's nervous, but I got that from it. Likewise, with how Allah organizes the text, it could be that he says something and then he says something else. You go, oh, that's the implication is from here to here, there's some logic there. Oh, that's why did he go back to this topic? Oh, this is a case study of what he just spoke about earlier. So he's reviewing it for me because I got to it and now he's reviewing that topic for me. And he's ending it with the same thing so that I wrap my mind around it and say, like, oh, yeah, don't lose where we were going. We started here. I want you to remember what the main topic was. So there's a lot to glean from this study, I think. There's also arguments for it helps build the iman, the faith that this is from God, this is divinely inspired. It's not the Sahaba who put it together. And I think there's also arguments to be made that I make on that blog that even the order of the surah as they are today, one Fatiha, Baqarah, Nisa, Ali Imran, Nisa, etc., to the end to Nas, that's divinely inspired. And I think there's some structural, organizational arguments to be made to say like these two surahs back to back form a coherent structure, whether it's a ring structure between them or a parallel structure. And I've also shown that with multiple surahs, like 1, 2, 3 surahs back to back to back, showing a huge parallel structure to say like it can't be random. It seems that Allah placed these here like this, and there's proofs for that. At least we can propose them, and they're all observations though. And I think this is on one end, it's a speculative study, so I don't say anything definitive comes out of it. Though, best case scenario, it's a tool for mufassirun when people do tafsir to look at and say, like, I like this. I think it makes total sense. It can enhance the tafsir of the surah I'm already doing based on all the tafsir works I'm referencing, and it's kind of like the cherry on top. It's not a thing on itself, but it's the bonus material, as one person told me.
If anyone wants a good example of that, so I actually just finished reading Sheikh Farhan Zubairi's Tafsir Surah Maryam,
Oh yes,
and then you've got a whole section at the end. So that's, I think, if anyone wants an example of what you're saying, like, that's a really good book because it goes, through the whole tafsir, like a very easy to read, easy to digest explanation of the surah, and then your material at the end on the structure of the surah and how it all ties together. So reading all that together is really impactful. Alhamdulillah.
yeah, it's great bonus material. It's the best if you've gone through a tafsir or something. If you know a surah intimately, and then you read the structure, you're like, oh, this is amazing. But on its own, like if I give you the structure of Surah, like I'm doing right now on the blog, most people, myself included, don't have it memorized. So it's harder to relate. But
Mm.
if you can, Juzama is all done, by the way. It's all on the blog. It's free, obviously. So if you open it up, and that's, inshallah, the first book I hope to publish is going to just be Juzama, to introduce
Oh,
the topic to the world, the masses. And then it's also something most people can relate to. Like, yeah, I don't know much of the Quran, but I know the stuff here. So
yeah.
when I explain a structure there, they can at least be like, oh, I get what he's saying. And it's short enough, I can reference it very quickly.
Okay. All right. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah. Thank you for the time.
One
Good
second.
therapy session.
Let me